Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus virtual meeting. I'm Ed Charbonneau, as Lisa said, and we'll be presiding over today's meeting. I thank everybody for joining today on this absolutely fantastic Monday morning. When we unfortunately can't get together in person, which also will always be the top priority, we have the option now to either get together and look at each other's photos or get together on a Zoom meeting. And I would prefer looking at your smiling faces much more, and I'd take the Zoom meeting in any time. A couple of things I want to give special thanks to Robin Gable for chairing the first committee. I understand it went quite well, and I intentionally missed the meeting so that I just felt it would be good for Robin to have one more developmental assignment under her belt before she took over as chair. Just kidding. She did a fantastic job. And I also want to acknowledge the past chair, Ann Rest. And I tell you, through my time as the chairman, it's always been very comforting to have Ann Rest part of the group, that when I start to fumble, she's always there to save me. And, you know, it's kind of interesting that Ann is the only individual that has carried the title of past chairman, because everyone else that has been the chairman has not stayed in the legislature when they were finished. And come next year, I will be approaching Ann and asking her if we can't form a past chairs caucus to get a little more influence as we move forward. Our next meeting will be October 9th, and I hope that everybody will be able to participate in that meeting. I've now rambled a little bit, but I want to reiterate that time is at a premium today, so we're going to move through this Zoom meeting pretty quickly. I'll skip the normal introductory remarks regarding a Zoom meeting. I assume that we've all been in enough of them that we understand it. And if there should be a slide coming up that's on virtual meetings 101. And on that slide, it has information. Should you need a refresher or something, you can either do what's on the slide or call one of the crack members of the CSG technology savvy group that can help you through. We will be and are recording the session today. Last week, we kicked off our virtual meetings with a focus on lead in drinking water. Today, we turn our attention to another topic that is high on the list of the caucus's priorities: and nutrient pollution. It's so important to the region that we made it the focus of our first Patricia Burkholtz Institute for Great Lakes St. Lawrence Policy. And the Institute is our principal way of organizing members to address specific issues that are on our policy agenda. And it's a way that we can have to study it, to share it, and take coordinated regional action to hopefully solve it. We'll be hearing about the work of our own task force on nutrient management with Senator Andre Jacques from Wisconsin providing that report. Senator Jacques chairs the task force, and like anyone else that has stepped up, I really thank him for guiding us through this initiative. And next we'll hear from Santino Wortman, of the United States EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office. Ms. Wortman will provide an overview of the nutrient-related goals under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement between the United States and Canada. She'll also help us get a sense for how we're doing as far as achieving those goals. And as always, we'll be listening for ways that state and provincial leaders can help to advance progress in advancing this significant and it's preventable water quality threat on the Great Lakes. Thank you, Senator Jacques and Ms. Wortman, for taking the time to speak to us today. Before I turn the floor over to Andre, we can't have one of these sessions, or shouldn't have one of these sessions, without a special call out, recognition, thank you, and show our collective appreciation for the Fred A. and Barbara Erb Family Foundation for their support of the caucus and their work on nutrient pollution over the past year and a half. We literally could not have done this work without the generous financial support we've received from the foundation. And in the interest of time, we will take questions after both presentations. So with that, Senator Jacques, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator Charbonneau. I would like to start by thanking my colleagues from the Burkholz Institute and the Nutrient Management Task Force and the GLLC Executive Committee for their ongoing commitment and support of this effort. And of course, to Lisa Hanairo for her efforts in pulling this all together. And as you just mentioned, the Fred A. and Barbara Foundation, especially with both the Burkholz Institute as well as the ongoing Nutrient Management Task Force. So just as background, as Senator Charbonneau had mentioned, the Nutrient Management Task Force was created last year following the initial Patricia Burkholz Institute for Great Lakes St. Lawrence Policy. And many, but not all, members of the task force were Burkholz Fellows. I'm pleased we actually have had a few additions and participation now from all states and provinces in our region. And so I was actually a Burkholz Fellow and a member of the steering committee. And now I have the pleasure of serving as the task force chair and as an ex officio member of the executive committee for the GLLC. And luckily we've had the opportunity to present to our members on this topic several times. Next slide, please. So just for context, we talk a lot about Lake Erie, but Lake Erie isn't the only affected water body. There are a lot of other entities affected by excess nutrients, certainly Green Bay in Wisconsin, Saginaw Bay in Michigan, and the Finger Lakes region of New York are just a few of the other places where this is a pressing issue. And all water bodies in our region certainly can benefit if we can improve the way nutrients are managed. Every watershed can really benefit. Next slide. And one more. So following the process established by the Task Force on Lead, our task force developed a policy resolution which the GLLC Executive Committee adopted in November. And then we followed that by developing an action plan earlier this year, guide work for a 2-year period. And earlier this month, we recommended a number of policies to the Executive Committee as model policies and best practices. Those were accepted on September 15th, and all these materials are in your briefing book for the GLLC annual meeting. Now to get into model policies that we've recommended. So we narrowed down a long list of possibilities to focus on what makes the most sense to pursue at this time, especially given the fiscal constraints
I'm in my house,
governments are facing.
Which is over at Chase. Or yeah, I'm in my house over at Chase and Damon, and I just heard him.
Items fell into 4 categories.
I'm sorry.
Everybody who's not
Yeah.
speaking for could mute their microphone. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jenny, can you advance to the next slide, please?
Perfect. Yes. So model policies for agriculture. This is the largest topic just because it's estimated to contribute about 85% of the nutrients that enter the water. And we are, as you can see on the screen, very supportive of incentivizing and reducing barriers to voluntary programs to help producers adopt best management practices with verification, like Michigan, which is one of the opportunities that we really had by having the Patricia Burkholz Institute in Michigan. We had a chance to go out into the field and see how this works in real life. And I know many of you might also have producer-led watershed management grant programs similar to what we have in Wisconsin that have been extremely effective in working with our producers and being able to provide funding for those investments in model practices, infrastructure that are going to have, really great efficiency in reducing nutrient pollution. So next slide is on education and outreach. So it's important to help stakeholders and the public as a whole understand the causes and impacts of nutrient pollution and the role that they can play in reducing the problem. When we had the Patricia Burkholz Institute, one of the things I think I mentioned before was this tabletop exercise we had of everybody playing different roles and really understanding where everybody comes into the conversation and how we can work across different boundaries to make sure that everybody has the resources they need to be part of the solution. So collaboration in evaluating progress is another important component, and we want to empower everybody to be able to help report that information that lets us know that we're moving in the right direction. Green infrastructure also has its own category coming up, but that's included here as part of the education and outreach for NPDES permitting in the states. Next slide, please. Accountability. So a lot of resources are being invested in fixing this problem, and we want to make sure that those investments are having their intended effect and paying off. And if they aren't, we need to change what we're doing or how we're doing it. So the best way we see to do this is to work through an organization like the Great Lakes Commission to define regional metrics and report at least annually for blue accounting. I would like to thank our GLLC members, several of whom have engaged with the blue accounting team at GLC, working to ensure that there's state engagement in these efforts. There even has been some legislation introduced. Of course, blue accounting was the focus of one of our task force's recent sponsored webinars for GLLC members, and I encourage you to go back and take a look at that, or obviously we'll be including them in upcoming offerings here as well. State and provinces can also make their own progress reports prominent and easily accessible and intelligible to the public on their websites. Those would be water quality dashboards that I know several states have been very interested in developing as well. Moving on to the next slide. We have green infrastructure, just beyond education and outreach. And we do support the creation of stormwater utilities, or at least eliminating some of the barriers to them. Some jurisdictions already have at least half of their population covered. Others have pretty significant barriers that might be unintentional in terms of regulations and burdensome process. So we're looking to streamline the process to be able to create stormwater utilities and to establish enforceable post-construction requirements such as on-site retention and infiltration, total suspended solids, and peak discharges. Next slide. So now for our plans for next year, 2021, the intention is for model policies to be implemented where possible and where needed to strengthen policies and programs. So in other words, accountability is important for our caucus too. We'll be focusing on legislative activity and working with the Great Lakes Commission to compile questionnaires for each of the policy categories to guide member outreach to state agencies and provincial ministries to gather data on policies, programs, and funding related to the policies. Ideally, we want to be able to compare apples to apples and have numbers that are going to line up in terms of what we're looking at and making sure that that's working across the entire basin. So there will be updated information posted on Blue Accounting where we'll be tracking progress, and members will be assuming as well as preparing bills for introduction. Task force members will take the lead with support from executive committee members, support from other GLLC members in each jurisdiction would be welcome. So please take a look at model policies, decide where you can step up and be a leader. Consider joining our task force. Lisa will be more than happy to connect you. Next, we have educational activities. Great Lakes Legislative Caucus members should watch for nutrients to be the focus of one of the GLLC quarterly meetings next year, specifically model programs at the state and provincial level. The task force will also hold a separate web meeting to demo the new dashboards on Blue County, designed to share information in particular interest to a legislative audience. We'd also like to share with GLLC members information on the Great Lakes Commission's Conservation Kick, which is a new program to set up a trading marketplace connection, connecting water utilities to agricultural producers in the basin. Obviously, we have a number of state programs, and we want to make them as effective as possible. And look state by state at what's working the best. I know we already had a chat that I saw come across the bottom while we started this webinar, just asking about that, and certainly something that has a lot of interest. We're doing everything we can here in Wisconsin to improve the program, and so hopefully help us in doing that. Perhaps some of the legislators attending might also know of a utility that are interested in being a buyer of producer credits. So whatever we can do to find a way to connect people, making sure that the credit trading programs work as effectively as possible. And lastly, there's going to be another task force workshop. We have planned to hold a summer workshop this year, taking hands-on education. Obviously, we figured a few months ago that that wasn't going to work, but we have postponed to spring of next year due to COVID-19. We're planning to begin in early 2024. Finally, I just like to thank Nicole Zaccarda and the Great Lakes Commission for their ongoing support for the task force, including GLC input on the Blue Accounting redesign and in the conservation kick development. And as Senator Charbonneau mentioned, I really want to thank the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation for their very generous support of the Burkholz Institute and the task force's work. The experience of the 2019 Institute has provided, I think, a very solid foundation which build as the GLLC plans the Institute for next year, and the topic will be decided later during the business session. I intend to be in the steering committee for 2021 and encourage other members to get involved as well. That concludes my report. So thank you to the caucus, and I will turn it back to Senator Charbonneau. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Very good presentation. And as we said before, we'll take questions at the end. So welcome, Ms. Wortman, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Can folks hear me okay? I know the audio was a bit choppy for me towards the end.
Yeah, yes.
You can hear me fine? Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad to speak with you all this morning. Next slide. I'll be talking to you about the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement work that we've been doing. You know, as Senator Jacques said, that Lake Erie is not the only place that has harmful algal blooms in the Great Lakes region, but it is still kind of our highest priority in terms of our binational work under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. We have been pretty busy the last few years. We had developed the phosphorus reduction goals. We then subsequently developed action plans that are called domestic action plans, which I'll be talking a bit about those. We have a binational phosphorus reduction strategy that kind of lays out how all of the different jurisdictions are working towards the same goals and how we're going to measure progress towards those goals. And if you look at this kind of wheel in the middle here, this is our adaptive management wheel. And this is really important that, you know, this is an iterative process. So we set our goals, we have our plans, we're implementing those plans now. We're going to be monitoring and evaluating progress, and then we're going to keep kind of feeding that feedback loop It's going to be, we have a lot of opportunity to learn and to try to reduce uncertainty along the way. Next slide. So just to review what we committed to in the agreement of 2012, we were charged to kind of review the existing phosphorus targets for each of the Great Lakes and revise them if necessary. So we revised the Lake Erie goals, and we determined that a reduction of 40% was needed to the loads to the western and central basin of Lake Erie. That was done in 2016. And then 2 years later in 2018, we established our domestic action plans, which outline, how we're going to try to meet those goals. So we're now in the phase of implementing those plans, monitoring and evaluating progress. Those, next slide, please. Those domestic action plans are 5-year plans. So we actually have 6 plans in total. We have a joint plan on the Canadian side, that's the Canada and Ontario action plan. On the US side, we have a US action plan that's an overall framework, and then we have individual state plans from each of the states that have a reduction goal. So that's Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So 6 plans in total, 5-year plans, and they would be revised or reviewed every, starting in 2023. So I was asked today to talk about, some of the programs at work in the US and in Canada. In the US, we have, several, I'm sorry, next slide, several federal, state, and locally led programs to achieve the nutrient goals. And this is important because the US has kind of the lion's share of the phosphorus reduction to achieve. So, our 40% is a reduction of over 3,000 metric tons, which is 7 million pounds on an annual basis. And that is a significant amount to reduce. And most of that is going to be coming from, privately owned agricultural lands in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. And because of that, a lot of the strategy to address those and the programs in place are, agricultural voluntary incentive-based programs, such as the Farm Bill funded, conservation programs. We have the ag industry-led 4R stewardship program. We have demonstration farms in the region. And so again, a lot of focus on, voluntary adoption of recommended practices and outreach and education to farmers to help them build their confidence on how to implement those. The next slide. In Canada, there's also, many different programs at play. There's a focus as well on non-point sources. There's also several significant municipal infrastructure projects. So in the Grand River and the Thames River. On the agricultural side, the focus is soil health, establishment of cover crops, manure management. Sorry. Okay, don't do that right now, Mirabelle.
He's hungry.
No, Mirabelle, you have to wait. Okay, I'm sorry, but don't do that right now.
How much water does he need?
Okay, sorry, you guys. So in addition, we've got nutrient management and greenhouse operations, work to optimize wastewater treatment plants, green infrastructure, wetland creation projects. A lot of these programs are made possible by the Great Lakes Protection Initiative, the Canada Agricultural Partnership, the Lake Erie Agriculture Demonstrating Sustainability Program, and the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Program that I mentioned. And a lot of the programs too are being supported by some pretty robust science that's being conducted by the governments and their academic partners under the Great Lakes Protection Initiative and the Canada-Ontario Agreement. So next slide. So the governments back in 2015, the governments of Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario had signed a Western Lake Erie Collaborative Agreement, which is a commitment to meet the 40% reduction target by 2025 with an aspirational goal to achieve 20% of the phosphorus reduction by 2020. And This is important because in Annex 4 in our binational work, we haven't really committed to any deadline or a time frame to which we were going to achieve the reductions. This is more of a, a political aspirational goal to show the commitment that, this is really something that folks are going to be working towards achieving. But we are already being asked, how are we doing towards that 2020 benchmark? And so I will try to touch on that in my talk today. A lot of the programs across the different jurisdictions are, similar in that they're focused on a few key strategies. One is, on the agricultural side, enhanced 4R management programs. So nutrient management, education and outreach, and working with industry. On the urban side, municipal wastewater treatment. I've got some feedback there. Municipal wastewater treatment, as well as green infrastructure. And then, to complement that, you need stream restoration and work on the kind of natural hydrology to improve the stream's assimilative capacity to handle nutrients and handle the high flows. And then something new that I know someone asked about in the chat that we're focused on in the US is market-based initiatives and water quality trading, making that possible. So I'll touch on something we're working on in the US to advance that. In the US, many of these actions and programs are made possible by the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Next slide. But we do have state-led efforts as well. And a significant one in Ohio is recently announced the H2 Ohio initiative. So this is a pretty significant funding package. Excuse me, Carol, please be quiet. They're going to have they're going to be directing $80 million from the state budget just to Ohio's portion of the Western Lake Erie Basin over the first 2 years of the program. And they're funding agricultural programs as well as wetlands and other tactics as well. Next slide. A program that's operating in all 3 of the Western Lake Erie Basin states and in Ontario is the 4R program. This is a program that certifies nutrient service providers that recommend 4R practices related to the right source, right rate, right time, and right place. So this is about optimizing so that you're only applying as much fertilizer as is needed at the right time so the crops can take it up. It's really an education and outreach program, and farms can receive a stewardship certification, which can be posted at their farm. Next slide. So wastewater treatment is another tactic, and in Ontario, they've actually reduced the effluent limit to 0.5 milligrams per liter of phosphorus, and that's going to be applied to all treatment plants over 1 million, discharging over 1 million gallons per day. In Michigan, discharge limits were strategically reduced for just the 4 of the plants that had the largest load, the biggest contribution to the total phosphorus load from Michigan. And one of those was the Detroit plant, the Great Lakes Water Authority, which importantly has already achieved a 400 metric ton reduction, which is a long way towards Michigan's 40% reduction goal. And they achieved that through really optimization of the plant's operations. They didn't have to add new treatment, tertiary treatment. Next slide. Another tactic would be reducing combined sewer overflows, and in Indiana, there's a project underway in Fort Wayne, the Tunnel Works project, that's going to be reducing CSOs to the St. Mary's and Maumee rivers by 90%. Construction began in 2017 and is scheduled to be fully operational by 2025. Next slide. And as I mentioned, another complementary strategy is then to kind of restore the natural hydrology. So increasing riparian buffers, stream banks, and floodplains. Hold on, Mirabel.
Mom, you don't need him. I can be.
Okay. Hold on 1 second, you guys. There is a bottle in the other room, Mirabel.
I just wanted to practice making it in case I ever have to do.
And Tina, this is Lisa. I just want to offer you encouragement and say you're doing a phenomenal job.
I was holding the baby on my lap.
Considering you have 2 children, very young children in the room. So soldier on. We mothers and fathers support you.
Thanks for your patience. Okay. So one example of those kind of programs is this Save Mommy's Riparian Buffer Initiative, which is funded by the GLLC and the U.S. Forest Service. You know, it's a lot of tree planting and expanding the buffers. Again, it's to help assimilate the high flows and trap sediment-bound nutrients in the buffers themselves. Next slide. I know someone in the chat asked about trading, water quality trading. EPA is interested in that in this administration. We've been turning our attention to, you know, trying to increase the use of market-based programs. And so we, through the GLRI, offered a new grant program in the last year. That was actually the first time the GLRI had been used on this particular topic for market-based trading type of projects. And we were able to award 5 grants. The recipients are listed here. And these projects are, you know, performance-based agriculture incentive programs. There's the one in Green Bay by New Water is for installing vegetated buffers on headwater streams of the Fox River. The one project by the Great Lakes Commission, which I think Senator Jack referred to, was expanding the use of trading in the basin by creating new incentives to participate in trading by including drinking water utilities as potential buyers of water quality credits. Also in the Fox River, there's a project that is going to design a market-based trading clearinghouse for the Fox River. So if you're interested in any of those projects, we have a bit more information on our website, but those are just starting up. So I'd be glad to put anyone in touch with those. Next slide, please. So how will we measure progress? This is really important because we know that the 40% reduction is a big ask, and we also know that, you know, overall farmers are doing a good job of, you know, managing nutrients on their fields. It's the losses are relatively small. The problem, I think, is that a lot of the practices that are in place they perform well over the long term or over the course of the year, and they're not really designed to perform during these high flow storm events. And so, you know, we have this is really a non-point driven system where a lot of the phosphorus is getting delivered during a handful of storm events. So, you know, if the practices that are in place don't work during those moments, then we're not going to be effective in reducing the phosphorus that's delivered during those storm events when they're needed the most. So, you know, it's really important that we continue to study kind of the effectiveness of the management practices on the ground. So we have to measure progress, you know, on the land and then in the streams and ultimately in the lake. And I'll talk about each of these. On the next slide, this is an image of tracking progress towards healthier Lake Erie. This is our Erie Stat website, which is where the information I'm sharing with you today is all available on Erie Stat. We have our action plans there. We have the status of our phosphorus reduction goals and all of the data that I'm going to be sharing today. This site was developed by the Great Lakes Commission in partnership with the Annex 4 jurisdictions. So the next slide, when we look at what's happening in the lake, we have what's called a severity index that NOAA developed. It's a scale of 1 to 10 for how severe the bloom was. It takes into account the concentration of the toxins, the amount of algae that's there, and also the spatial extent. And so these bars are showing that ranking each year, and you can see that, you know, they're very variable every year, and they're still pretty significant. We're seeing pretty significant blooms in the last few years. So we haven't seen any kind of downward trend yet in terms of the blooms. And just as an FYI, you know, 2020 is projected to be a little bit smaller than 2019 and bigger than 2018, if you're interested. So that's one of the tools we use to track in the lake whether things are changing. Then on the next slide, we look at, what the loads are coming into the lake from the streams. You can see here, and this is also on Erie Stat. Hold on one second. Okay, so walking you through this chart of the total loading to Western and Central Lake Erie basins. The red line is our target. So that's our goal, 6,000 metric tons. You can see that we're above that goal almost every year. This is the last 10 years from 2008, which is our baseline. The only years that we were below the goal, 2016 and 2010, were dry years. So basically we can attribute that to there being less flow. And in most years, the loads are pretty variable with the flow. And again, it's a non-point driven system. So we're seeing that a lot of the variability, if you look at the size of those bars, the blue and the orange are the non-point tributary monitored phosphorus that's coming in. And this is consistent with the historic record, just that, we have a lot of variability from year to year, and that variability is coming from non-point source runoff. So the next slide. It's interesting to then look at, what happened in this past year, in 2019, because we had 40% of the land went unplanted, which was really significant. It was so wet that a lot of farmers couldn't even get out in their fields at all. And this visual here is showing the vegetation index so that you could see the difference in how many acres went unplanted in 2019 compared to 2018. This had an important impact on the landscape because only less than half of the commercial fertilizer was sold, and we had about 15% of what we would normally have for manure application. And so it's interesting to see, well, what was the impact of that? Next slide. What we found was, and you can see here again, the 2019 is the red bar just showing how many acres went unplanted compared to previous years. It really was a record. And what we saw was that actually the phosphorus, the dissolved phosphorus, even though it was still very high, was lower, 30% lower than it was expected to be for the amount of flow that we had. And we think, again, that's because there were less, nutrients applied to the landscape. So that means the bloom could have been even worse than it was. Not to say this is a success story, but it's a learning opportunity because it shows us that, okay, clearly, the present day inputs every year of nutrients to the landscape are having a significant impact. In this case, up to 30%. But there is also a lot of phosphorus that's already there from previous year's applications, and that builds up in the soil, and it's called legacy phosphorus. So that is going to take some time to work through the system. And in any given year, you have a combination of what was applied this year and what was there from before. That really kind of makes it difficult to see, the result of your management actions in that year. So next slide. This is kind of my final point. I just wanted to emphasize this. This is why this is important. And it's not to say, there's a lot of discussion right now about legacy P, and it's not to say kind of throw your hands up in the air and there's nothing you can do about it. It's really just, it's something that we need to understand, because whether you're dealing with phosphorus that's already there and built up in the soils, or what's being applied today, there's different management strategies to address both of those sources. It's going to be different. And the other issue you have to understand is that legacy is going to be kind of like a chronic source of pollution. It's going to take us longer to see what progress we're making, because that legacy has to work its way through. Now, as we continue to reduce the contemporary phosphorus, that legacy will stop building up. And then as we treat that, it will come down. But it will take time. So It's important to understand this. We don't want to discourage producers, if they don't see the results of their efforts. We also don't want to have, our efforts kind of misinterpreted. So it's something that's really a keen interest and something that's an active area of research right now by a lot of our folks that work in the agricultural sector. That's my last slide. My slide here is the last slide is just, a link to our domestic action plans and the Erie Stat website that I showed you for the tracking progress and my contact information. And I'd be glad to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Andre, and thank you, Santina, for the great presentations. And Santina, you deserve an award for making the greatest Zoom presentation ever under some very difficult circumstances. But it came across perfectly, so I do appreciate it. And let's see if we have any questions now from anyone. I don't know, Lisa, have we received any questions?
Sure. I see MPP Jennifer French is raising her hand. So there you go.
Thank you. And it's nice to see everyone. I was looking forward to, of course, the annual meeting and seeing all of folks and friends, but it's nice to see some new faces on here. And I recognize folks from Ontario as well. And I'm glad. I'm going to highlight, I see Andrea Kanjan here, and she's the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister for Environment, Conservation and Parks. And so I know that she's listening with interest, and I'm glad we have such a full team. But anyway, my question for you, Santina, a number of us on the task force had the opportunity to visit at an in-person meeting, to visit, point source location and to see what they were doing in terms of sewer and storm management and that sort of thing, that we had the opportunity to visit a farm that I think is, I don't know if it was a demonstration farm, but certainly it was part of the certified program, and was really a neat opportunity to learn and to see it in person. I have questions though about what the different state and provincial governments can kind of learn from each other when it comes to the flood management and looking at the point source challenges with the flood and kind of the sewage stuff. So I have a question about that. If there is a way to share that information, you had mentioned it briefly. And I had another question, but it couldn't have been that important. Anyway, so that'll do, I guess.
Can I come back to this question? I'm really sorry, just 1 second.
Yes, that would be fine. In the meantime, let's go. I see Senator Rest has her hand raised.
Yes, I was just, it's just a detail, but when I noticed in the list of grants that there was one to the Great Lakes Commission, and I was just wondering about the specifics of that, if you have that before you. Otherwise, I can ask the folks from the Great Lakes Commission about it too.
Okay, well, you're in luck because we have Nicole Zaccarda on the line, and she actually, Nicole is the one who helped with the Burkholz Institute on nutrient pollution, and she's leading the conservation kick effort. So, so Nicole, go ahead.
Sure thing. I'll handle a question while Santina's busy. Senator Rust, yes, we did receive funding through GLRI. It was a proposal that commissioners approved to put in quite a while ago, actually. We technically got approval to start the work in March, but because of some COVID delays that we've all been dealing with, we've just gotten busy on it this summer. We're looking for up to 5 communities around the Great Lakes Basin to help pilot this effort that, as Santina mentioned in her slides, we're not necessarily looking at traditional water quality trading with this project, but more whether the tools from water quality trading could translate into protecting sources of drinking water from nutrient impacts. So We're excited to potentially partner with those of you on the caucus to help identify communities. The first community in that is interested in buying credits is Defiance, Ohio. So we're very glad to be working with them, but again, have 4 more spots that we could fill in the project around the basin. So if any of you are interested and have a community that might be willing to join us with this, would be happy to connect on that.
Great, thank you for that, Nicole. And then I see we also have a hand raised by, I believe it's Illinois State Representative Rita Mayfield. Go ahead and unmute your line.
There we go. Yeah, I had a couple questions similar to the first two. The flooding was one, so I'll wait for her to come back and answer that one. I do have, for the young lady who just finished speaking, I do have a group or an area that is doing a wetlands project, and we're looking at doing legislation for the nutrient trade credit trading. I'm sorry, I'm tongue-tied this morning. So, but I'm still not really clear on how that nutrient trading works, particularly with these wetlands, with the stormwater management, and with our sanitary districts who also have a part in our quality of water. So any pros, cons, websites that you can drop into the chat would be really helpful, because we are looking at doing legislation around that.
Sure, thanks for the question. Let me give it some thought. One of the interesting things about wetland creation as a way to offset nutrients is that it gets fairly complicated in terms of being able to truly understand what the benefit is of the wetland. We certainly know that there's some really good things that happen, but a lot of the science, we're still pinning down the mechanisms as to how those nutrients are reduced. So for the models that we use classically within the water quality trading space, they aren't really tuned in to necessarily merge with that idea of a constructed wetland. That's not to say that it can't be done. One of the things that Burkholz Institute members definitely spent time with me and Lisa speaking to when we met in Detroit, and since then as the task force has carried forward, is this idea of monitored outcomes versus modeled, and trying to find your way through that tension where there needs to be probably more money for monitoring, but at the same time, you can't monitor everything. So how can we smartly develop these models? But I'll give some thought as to whether there's some resources you can take a look at. And if I don't think of it to put it in the chat today, I'll be sure to share it back with Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We have some questions in the chat. Santina, if you're ready. Let's see, we'll go back to the first question, which is in terms of the sources of nutrient runoff to Lake Erie, how much comes from agriculture versus other sources, and what are some of those other sources?
So it depends on, which watershed you're looking at as well. So in terms of what drives the HABs, it's mainly the Maumee River, which is, I think, 85% agricultural, the watershed. And so it's mostly the agricultural runoff and non-point runoff. There are some wastewater treatment plants as well, obviously, and, urban non-point source runoff as well. Ohio has done a really nice job with what they call their nutrient mass balance work, where they lay out in more detail where the different allocations of the sources are from within the watersheds draining into the Maumee.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And then we have a question from MPP Andrea Kanjan. She said, first of all, you're doing a great job juggling it all. The question is, how has rainfall affected phosphorus loads, and has salt been a contributing factor?
I don't know about salt. You mean like road salts?
I would assume so, unless there's
not that I'm aware of at this scale, but the rain is definitely a factor, and I think the issue too is not just how much rain, but how we really get inundated. So really the several inches of rain falling with, within a few hours time, it really overwhelms our drainage systems. It floods crop fields and so on. And, that kind of flash flooding rain, it seems like it's happening more often even than it did, 10 years ago. So we're seeing that the more intense and more frequent rainfalls are really contributing to a lot more of the phosphorus being lost during those storm events.
Okay, great. And then also question from Representative Rachel Hood from Michigan. Can we discuss the work and resources available regarding stormwater fee policies in more detail? So Santina or Nicole, I'm not sure if one of you can address that, but Representative Hood mentions that this is an area where Michigan needs to catch up. And there's I guess a mixed history on this in the state.
And I'm sorry, it was about stormwater?
Stormwater fee policies. A way of creating stormwater utilities and charging fees to then better maintain stormwater.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that. I know that there is a lot of interest in building up green infrastructure in Detroit, and kind of maybe, I don't know if you're thinking more like how Milwaukee is set up with, they have a pretty innovative strategy for green infrastructure that really is kind of led by the stormwater utility.
Nicole, do you have the ability to add to that?
Okay. Yeah, I was just going into the Commission's website to see. We have a report that's probably a few years old now. I think it was actually presented by my colleague, Margot Davis, when a number of you may have convened in Erie, Pennsylvania, whenever that year was for your annual meeting, Lisa, when you guys could still gather in person. I'll find that report and I'll recirculate it. I think what we had identified and what we also started to work on a little bit with task force participants for the task force on nutrients is that there are some inconsistencies in terms of enabling legislation state by province in terms of how stormwater utilities or other entities can be organized and how they may be funded and what their powers and duties might be. It's certainly something that we've started to scratch the surface on. I am excited that I think that our commissioners are starting to think about ways for commission staff to re-engage in the broad water infrastructure discussion that would include stormwater. And so I'm optimistic that we're getting back into the saddle, and we'll hopefully be able to do that soon. But when I can find the link, I'll either share it in the chat or provide it to Lisa so that that previous report can be back in circulation with all of you.
Great, thank you for that. And then Santina, you offered to share information for points of contact of the different groups besides the Great Lakes Commission that received grants for the market trading. Please do send that to me and I'll make sure that it's available to the attendees. If anyone else has any questions, either raise, oh, MPP French, I wasn't sure if your hand was raised again or still. So go ahead, you've got the floor.
Thanks, Lisa, and both. So I am still interested in the answer about the different point source and industry challenges that, with different municipalities across the province doing different things in terms of, stormwater management or flooding and all of that, that if there was a way to kind of share best practices and apply even some pressure a little bit, because I think we've got a number of different companies or municipalities that are each responsible for it. And so if there was kind of that best practice, what we're starting to learn, I think that would be very interesting and hopefully useful. But I am going to jump on the second half of the question I'd forgotten, was kind of stealing from Andrea's question about salt. And I'm going to add to that just to frame it. We of course, yes, it's road salt and it's for safety, but again, and I'm not an expert on this, how that's managed you know, by municipalities or by businesses, and everybody kind of has their own methods for putting out the salt, storing the salt. So throughout the entire year, you can have piles of salt that are just leaching into the world over the course of the year, you know, that it's not just during the winter. And it's not just salt, not to minimize the effects of salt. And I don't know if we're measuring that, but the salinity of streams, the challenges that we're finding across the province, there's also chemically treated salt, different things like that. So I wonder if that's something that is being measured somewhere or tracked, or if there's, I mean, I hear about it anecdotally as a representative in my area by people who are, you know, concerned, but I don't know if it's a broader problem that is contributing, you know, if it's not a nutrient per se, but it's still, I think, part of this conversation. That's it. Now I'm done with that, promise, for now.
Thank you. Santina?
So we haven't focused on it much in our work under Annex 4, the contribution of road salts. I mean, I think that's something that's looked at locally. I know that I know of watersheds in the U.S. where that's been an issue, and I've actually heard that it can be an issue with green infrastructure, because if you end up infiltrating into the groundwater, the road salt, you know, that can be damaging as well. So it's one of those, it's a bit tricky because we want to promote green infrastructure, but I've heard, you know, that can also be a consideration that where it can have the opposite effect that you intended by then just kind of moving that pollution into groundwater instead of surface water. So I think it's something that is looked at locally by municipalities, but we haven't really been looking at it like a binational level.
Okay. I have a question for you, Santina. You mentioned, you know, your presentation walked through various different tactics for managing nutrients and achieving the goals of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And I'm just wondering which of the tactics are in the best shape, you know, have done the most, and which ones really still have a lot of room for growth?
Well, I think that on the agricultural side, you know, the 4R program has really taken off and has a lot of support and a lot of potential to have a lot of impact. You know, the kind of farmer-led education and outreach programs that are there and stewardship programs for farmers are really going to be the most successful, I think. And then which ones are less developed? Well, I just think that the other piece that needs to kind of go hand in hand with that is the drainage management and, you know, kind of that restoring that natural hydrology, constructed wetlands, riparian buffers, and so on. And that's a really difficult one because it involves, you know, taking land out of production sometimes and finding willing landowners to do those types of projects. There's not a whole lot of incentive besides environmental to make those projects work. So I think that's the big challenge.
Great, thank you for that. Does anybody else have questions? Either raise your virtual hand in the participants section or raise your actual hand or type your question in the chat. Trying to monitor people with hands raised. Last call for questions. And if anybody has additional questions when we're done here, just go ahead and email me and I'll get them to Santina and to Senator Jacques. But with that, Senator Charbonneau.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. One more time, I'd like to express my appreciation for Andre, first of all, for stepping up in ensuring this first issue that we're tackling, doing a fantastic job. Thank you for what you did. And Santina, again, thank you for your presentation. Under challenging circumstances, you delivered. You delivered. So with that, one of the things that we had done was we were having quietly a mug competition. And I think it's a tie between Jennifer and Linda, yeah, with regard to oh, wait a second, Ann. Okay, we're going to Linda, man alive, difficult decision. I can't make the decision right now, but very, very impressive. Again, thank you. It's going to be interesting to see what we all do as our legislatures get back into session to see how we move forward with these things. Now we'll convene a brief business session, and there's just two parts. One is the chair's report, and then the second is a selection of focus for the 2021 Burkholz Institute. And we're scheduled to be done here at 15 minutes past the hour, so we should be able to meet that if I can just shut up once I start my chair's report here. But as I mentioned before, this is my last meeting as chair of the caucus, and I'm making my final chair's report, and it's more I'll say it's a reflection than it is a report. It is, in my opinion, as I prepare to leave the job, I think I can say without fear of contradiction that the caucus is stronger, more active than it was when my term began, and it has nothing to do with me. And I firmly believe that. I think, and I say it quite often, this group, I've been very blessed, has been extremely willing. And I guess it was the fact that they realized I need a lot of help, and that they all stepped up and did a fantastic job. All of you folks, the members, the partners, and I think the partners that we have developed is one of the focuses that I had, is going to be extremely important as we move forward. And then finally, we can't talk about anything without one more time thanking all of our funders for what they have so graciously done, and understood that we're making a difference. We're an organization that's making a difference, and we're all passionate about the fact that of the Great Lakes, and it's so important that we keep them clean and safe, so that every individual, every business, every industry has access to affordable, clean, safe water as we move forward. It's important work, and I feel that over the past 2 years, the caucus has taken a seat at the table in extremely important, and is an extremely important player in the programs and policies that people who are responsible for making laws. I think it's important that we, as an organization, we're the ones who make the laws, pass the laws, and fund all of this stuff. So it was incredible to me that we would be kind of out on our own, waiting for someone to come to us and say, okay, we need this. We're at the table now, and that is absolutely fantastic. I think that the organization is increasingly returning to our roots as a change agent, and that is very very gratifying to me, and I think everybody else. Last year, when we were in Chicago, I made the observation that the caucus was much more active, and our members had been engaged more than ever before. and it was all making a difference for the organization. I'll try and get through this much quicker than I am, but I had some thoughts that I put down that I wanted to expect. We're changing the trajectory of this organization, I think, with what we're doing, and that is outstanding. The focus, energy, ideas that came out of our strategic planning session in 2018 has been nothing short of transformational for the organization, and I'm so proud to play just a very small part in making that happen. I'm really proud to see a whole bunch of new faces that are getting involved in this and stepping up to meet the challenges that we're facing. I mentioned the upcoming election on October 9th, and well, we're going to ring in a new list of officers. I just want to say it's been a privilege to be the chairman of this organization, and I look so forward to be the second past chair of the organization. Well, you know, the last thing is one of the great things that we're doing is the Burkholz Institute, and we'll be looking to plan our second Burkholz Institute. As we all know, and as Andre talked about, the 2019 issue was water nutrient pollution, and now it's time to take a new focus as we move into we'll be doing it in late 2021. So with that, I cannot express my appreciation for everyone for what you have done, again, to make me look a whole lot better than I really am. And I cannot end this without giving a big shout out to Lisa. She is the captain behind the ship that kind of makes this all happen. So with that, I'll turn things over to Lisa, who will explain what our options are for the next Burkholz Institute. Again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Senator Charbonneau. I appreciate that. Well, as the members know, I sent out a survey asking all the GLLC members to vote on several options that came up during discussions and on evaluations for meetings such as this one. And those topics were helping communities become climate resilient, addressing PFAS contamination in drinking water, promoting the replacement of water infrastructure such as lead pipes and dams, examining the potential for renewable energy, preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species, and then there were two that involved continuing to focus on nutrient management and on lead in drinking water, which were the focus areas for the inaugural institute and the pilot that the commission or that the caucus undertook in 2018. The members had the option of selecting two choices, and I can report that the top choice at just under 50% was helping communities become climate resilient. For example, adjusting to fluctuating lake levels. Following that one at 39% was promoting the replacement of water infrastructure like lead pipes and dams, and 35% voted for preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species. These are all important issues. They're all on the caucus's policy agenda, and they all warrant focused attention by the organization. The top choice of related to climate resiliency has the advantage of presenting opportunities to work closely with the Great Lakes Commission, which is currently preparing an action plan on climate resilience. And I'm sure some of the recommendations in the plan will require legislative action. I've actually been involved with that group for the past few months, and I know Senator Rest is on the standing committee for climate resilience at the commission as well. Helping coastal communities Become Climate Resilient also opens the door for greater collaboration, I hope, with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. So those are the options, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to make a recommendation. I think that's up to the members. I am pleased to report, though, that several members who filled out the survey did express interest in serving on the new Burkholz Institute Steering Committee, regardless of the topic chosen. So I'll be in touch with you about making those appointments. First step, however, is to choose the topic, and I'll turn the floor back to you for that.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate the folks that are willing to step up and take part and be an active member of the next Burkholz Institute. And with that, Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Lisa. I also want to express my appreciation for everyone who took the time to think thoughtfully about what our next topic should be. And I'm going to make a motion that we choose the top topic, which is helping our communities deal with climate resilience. I think it's very timely. It is very, very bipartisan in every state. And I think that it fits in well with the activities of the Great Lakes Commission at this point, which has been working for the last year on this topic through their special committee. Of course, the Great Lakes Commission is not even primarily legislators. So I think that it's a good topic for legislators to take on throughout our 10 jurisdictions. And Mr. Chairman, I formally move that we adopt that topic for the Burkholz Institute in 2021.
Okay, thank you, Senator Rest. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. I don't know how we do this, Lisa. All those in favor of the motion, please put your thumb up or your hand up. Or okay, everybody I see is in favor. So thank you, everyone. That will be the topic for the second Burkholz Institute. So thank you very much. Before we're going to make it on time here, before we wrap up, I'll turn it over to Lisa for a few announcements.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to mention the upcoming sessions. We had 4 of these scheduled. We're halfway through. So on October 2nd, we'll be looking at PFAS contamination. And that business session is going to include the regional roundtable where the executive committee members from all states and provinces have a chance to report on notable legislative activities in their jurisdictions. And please remember that that session, just like this one, is going to run until, 75 minutes. Following that, on October 9th, we will hear from 3 of the caucus's partner organizations on building resilient communities and coastal priorities and the Great Lakes Investment Platform. I hope you'll be able to attend. The business session for that meeting will include some very important activities, such as electing the officers and executive committee members. You can see the recommended slate of candidates in the briefing book for this meeting and all the meetings. We'll also be looking at the resolutions that have been submitted. We'll have, I believe, 7 by the time the caucus meets on the 9th. And then we'll hear an invitation for the 2021 annual meeting, which we all hope is going to be in person in Quebec City. That meeting, because of the number of business items and the number of speakers, will run 90 minutes, so please plan accordingly. And then, John, if you'll post in the chat the evaluation link, it really helps us to get feedback from members and other attendees regarding our performance and services to you through these virtual meetings. So please take a moment to fill out the evaluation. I'll also be sending a link to the evaluation in the follow-up message from this from this virtual meeting. And I want to thank my colleagues, Jenny Chidlow and John Davis, and especially Tim Anderson for putting together this session and helping with the on-air logistics today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. That brings us to the end of our second virtual meeting. I want to thank again Andre and Santina for making their presentations, and thank the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation for their continuing support. And lastly, giving my reflections to a computer doesn't give it justice. I really wish that we were all together and I could express my my great appreciation to everyone who has been with me on this journey. And we are a better organization than we were 2 years ago because what you all have done. So thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.